Hello, my name is Russell Myers, independent for U.S. President for 2024. So the G7 meeting just wrapped up. So, uh, few few comments on this. First of all, I find the G7 to be highly controversial. Every time that the G7 meeting is held, there are many protests there, and many people around the world just don't agree with the very existence of the G7, and there's a good reason for that. There are many good reasons for that. Uh, Let me go to some of this. All right, so first of all, the members of the G7 are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States. All right, so I want you to notice something about every one of these countries. Every single one of these countries is a former or current colonial or neo-colonial country. Understand that? If you know anything about history, you understand every bit of that. Here's something interesting. All right, the G7 stated mission is it is organized around shared values of pluralism. Well, that would be, you know, globalism, that pluralism, liberal democracy, and representative government. Let me ask you, do you feel like your government represents you? Do Germans feel like their government represents them? The German government stated that they were going to continue providing weapons and aid to Ukraine no matter how the German people feel about it. You look at the massive protests going on in France while Macron is at the G7 meeting. They do not represent a representative government at all. Now, some of the stated missions of the G7 are economic development and security. Well, what happened at this meeting had nothing to do with economic development, especially of the global south, or security. What happened with this was that they were discussing ways to gang up and try to suppress Russia and China. There were two guest members, which is common, but the two guest member countries that were invited to this meeting. One was India. The purpose of India being there was to try and pressure India to impose sanctions on Russia and also on China. Ukraine was there. Zelensky was there. And what was his role? The same as his role has been in every country that he has visited. He was panhandling. That's what he was doing. Nothing else. If this was about security, they would be pressuring Zelensky to engage in peace talks to try and bring an end to that conflict. But Russia has stated that they, from the very beginning, that they are open to peace talks, but with no preconditions. Ukraine, if they were going to engage in peace talks, they have the precondition that Russia withdraw their forces from the 4 Donbass regions that voted to become part of Russia last year, and Crimea. And none of that is going to happen. Crimea voted in referendum in 2014 to become part of Russia. There was no Russian invasion of Crimea. Crimea was autonomous. They had their own parliament. They were economically part of Ukraine, but politically, overall, they were autonomous. So, that was, and the Donbass region, most of the people identified as ethnically Russian, and the same is true with Crimea. So, so Russian withdrawal from those regions is not going to happen. If peace talks are going to happen, they need to happen with no preconditions. So the results of trying to pressure India to impose sanctions on Russia did not work. It's not going to work. They have increased their imports of Russian oil exponentially, massive amounts of oil. Let's see. Brazil was there, and they tried to pressure Brazil to impose sanctions on Russia and China, and that's, again, it did not work. It's not going to work. Zelensky was supposed to meet with Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, and simply skip the meeting. He was too busy panhandling with other countries that he already is able to get things from. So none of that worked. All of the sanctions against Russia have failed. Let me point out that in spite of what Western media wants to represent, 85% of the world's countries have not imposed sanctions on Russia. Only 15% of the world's countries are imposing sanctions on Russia. The G7 used to comprise 64% of global GDP. At this point, the G7 only accounts for roughly 48% of GDP. So their influence is waning, and they know it. Anyway, so Australia is not there, but it's part of the UK. Consider the fact that Australia is a colony, or of the UK. It is not a colonizer. Something to consider, and I'm going to bring up Australia as part of this. Australia and Japan can politically be considered part of the West. And there's this constant pressure for Australia and Japan to impose sanctions on Russia and China, especially China. At this point, China. They're trying to build this coalition to sanction China. So let me bring something up here. For Australia, look at who their major trading partner is. This is for exports. 41% of their exports go to China. Imports, still their major trading partner, 27.57%. Japan, biggest trading partner. Exports, 22.65%. imports, 26.1%. So China is the largest trading partner of both China and Australia. So if they want to, the more that these countries look at what has happened with the sanctions on Russia and what it has done to the European economy and any country that has imposed sanctions on Russia. It has caused their cost of living to rise to an extreme. I've heard reports that the cost of food in the UK has doubled. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the cost of your food doubling in 1 year? And energy is being subsidized by the government, so they're having to just print money to subsidize energy bills in many of these countries. And that is unsustainable. You can't do that for long. And their energy imports are still insecure. They made it through this past winter on reserves that were already built up from imports from Russia. The coming winter, they are not sure what is going to happen as yet. Meanwhile, the impact of sanctions on Russia, on Russian energy, have failed completely. At this point, the exports, the destinations have changed, but Russia is actually exporting more oil and gas than they were in January of 2022. So they're more than they were exporting in 2020, all of 2021. So that's a complete failure. All these sanctions do not work. What else can they sanction? One of the last packages of sanctions, one package of sanctions included toilet paper, and the next package of sanctions included bidets. Okay, I don't know what the European hang up is on, whatever. So, honestly, if elected, I would withdraw from the G7. This is a group of political bullies. They're not. So this is non-inclusive, international, agreements and debates should be decided within the UN. And by the way, I am in favor of either expanding the UN Security Council or eliminating it completely, because the UN Security Council is archaic. This is not democracy. Democracy would be all members of the UN having an equal voice. That would be democracy. Having a limited number of countries being able to decide on global security and trade, that is not democracy. So, there were no, this whole meeting didn't have anything to do with economics aside from trying to impose sanctions. That's not economic development, that's economic suppression, and it's highly damaging. Anyway, share this video, talk about these subjects. If you can afford it, Please donate whatever you can to help expand my campaign. We can do this together. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a good day.